Ellie pushed open the glass door to Orsini Jewelers, the jingle of the bell above barely registering over the quiet hum of classical music piped through hidden speakers. Her fingers brushed against the edge of her hoodie as she stepped inside. The space gleamed with polished marble floors, mirror-lined walls, and glass displays that held rows of rings, earrings, and necklaces, each sparkling under precision lighting. She walked slowly, eyes scanning the rows, stopping in front of a simple diamond pendant that caught her attention. She reached out gently, the corner of her mouth lifting as she imagined how it might look on her. The moment was short-lived. From behind the sleek white counter, a woman in a tight black blazer and high heels made her way over. Claire, her nameplate read. She moved with practiced elegance, her eyes flickering to Ellie's hoodie, her worn jeans, then to her plain sneakers. The smile she offered didn't quite reach her eyes. "These pieces are all 14 carat and above," Claire said, her tone polite but laced with something colder. Ellie nodded, brushing her fingers away from the glass. "I know. I'm just looking for an anniversary gift." Claire's lips tightened into something resembling sympathy. "Unfortunately, we don't allow browsing without an appointment, especially during peak hours." Ellie blinked. "I wasn't aware. I'll just be a minute." "I'm afraid that's not how we operate," Claire replied, stepping slightly into Ellie's path. "We work by appointment only. We can schedule one for later this week if you'd like." Ellie stared at her, expression unreadable. "It's fine," she said, her voice soft. "I'll leave." Claire didn't move until Ellie turned away. As she headed for the door, she noticed a young couple near the back, holding hands and laughing while trying on rings. No one had asked them to leave. Outside, the chill of the Chicago wind bit at her cheeks. She wrapped her hoodie tighter around herself and walked the few steps to a waiting black sedan. The back door opened before she reached it, and she slid in, her silence more telling than any complaint. Inside the car, the air was warm. Marcus looked up from his phone. He was the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. Calm, poised, always in control. His coat was pressed, his watch subtle but expensive. "Bad service?" he asked, already sensing it. Ellie exhaled, her gaze on the traffic ahead. She didn't speak, just nodded once. Marcus studied her face for a moment, then leaned forward to speak to the driver. "Take us back to the office," he said, then glanced at Ellie. "Or actually, wait, let's go fix that." Ellie glanced at him, confused. "Fix what?" Marcus didn't answer. He reached into his inside pocket and pulled out his phone. "Jacob," he said when the call connected, "I need you to find out who owns Orsini Jewelers. I want to speak to them today. All branches, all assets. I'll hold." Ellie raised her eyebrows slightly. "Marcus, what are you doing?" He glanced at her. "They disrespected my wife. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm buying the damn place." She blinked at him, unsure if he was joking. He wasn't. His tone didn't change, his fingers calmly drumming against his leg as he waited for Jacob to respond. "No," he added. "I'm not mad. I just don't like it when people misjudge value." Ellie leaned back into the leather seat, unsure how she felt about the idea. She wasn't someone who believed in revenge or drama, but Marcus wasn't doing it for spectacle. He was doing it because in his eyes, disrespecting Ellie was disrespecting him. The car moved smoothly through the city traffic. Ellie didn't ask any more questions. She knew her husband. When he made a decision, it wasn't about ego, it was about principle. 10 minutes later, his assistant called back. The jewelry chain had been looking for a buyer. Quietly. The current owner had been trying to offload a few underperforming locations. Marcus's offer, immediate, aggressive, and in full, was too good to pass up. Marcus leaned back and looked at Ellie again. "You really like that necklace?" Ellie shrugged. "I don't want a necklace that comes with that kind of energy." Marcus nodded once, as if logging the comment for future reference. Fair, we'll replace the energy and the necklace. By the time the car turned a corner and disappeared from the street, Claire was back behind the counter, completely unaware that the man she'd just turned away held the pen that would soon own the floor beneath her feet. Marcus sat still in the back of the car, legs crossed, his phone pressed lightly to his ear. He wasn't a man of excess, no loud jewelry, no designer logos, no forced charm. But everything about him, the sharp line of his tailored jacket, the unhurried cadence of his speech, the way he gave quiet commands that were always followed, made it clear he didn't play by other people's rules. "Jacob," he said, his voice steady, "find out who owns Orsini Jewelers. All of it. I want names, contact points, and every open location. I need a meeting with the person in charge. Today, within the next hour." He hung up without waiting for a reply. Next to him, Ellie watched the city slip by outside the window. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers curled slightly. She wasn't angry, not in the way people expected. She wasn't the type to shout or demand justice. Her quiet held more weight than any outburst could. Marcus glanced at her. "You okay?" She nodded once, not looking at him. "You don't have to do anything." He turned fully toward her. "No, I want to." Downtown traffic hummed around them, but inside the car it was still, the silence between them not uncomfortable, but heavy with something unspoken. Ellie wasn't used to making a scene. She never liked being the center of attention, never asked for protection. But she also knew Marcus well enough to understand when he chose to act, it wasn't impulse, it was intention. Across town, Claire leaned against the glass display case, adjusting a velvet tray of engagement rings. She was still riding the high of authority, still unaware of the chain of events she had triggered. "You can always tell who's not a buyer," she said to the junior associate beside her. "The ones who walk in like they don't belong. Hoodie, sneakers, looking like they're browsing Target. Waste of time." The younger woman, Amanda, shifted uncomfortably. "She said she was looking for a gift." Claire rolled her eyes. "Sure, she was. People like that just want to pretend they're part of the world we live in. But it doesn't work. You either have it or you don't." Amanda didn't respond. She just looked down and focused on organizing the bracelets. She didn't agree, but she also knew better than to challenge Claire, not out loud. Back in the car, Marcus's phone buzzed. He picked it up immediately. "Go ahead," he said. His assistant's voice came through the line with practiced efficiency. "The Orsini chain is owned by a small private group, but the acting managing partner is Edward Collins. He's at the Uptown flagship location. I spoke with his office. He's available for a brief window now if you can get there in the next 30. "Text me the address," Marcus said, then tapped the driver on the shoulder. "Change of plans. Uptown, Orsini's main branch." "Make it quick." Ellie turned to him, brow furrowed. "You're actually doing this?" Marcus's eyes didn't leave the window. "I'm not doing this to prove a point. I'm doing this because it shouldn't have happened." She sighed softly. "Marcus, I don't need—" "I know you don't." His tone didn't rise. "That's why I'm doing it. You never ask for anything, and you don't deserve to be treated like a background character in a place we could buy 10 times over." She looked at him, really looked at him for a moment. There was no performance in him, no dramatics. He meant every word, not out of pride, but out of something more protective, more personal. "You're not just buying something, are you?" she asked after a pause. "No." He finally met her eyes. "I'm buying everything." The car curved into a quieter side street, lined with boutique storefronts and valet stands. As they pulled up in front of the flagship Orsini location, the doorman stepped forward instinctively, only to pause when Marcus opened his own door and stepped out without waiting. Inside, Edward Collins stood in a glass-walled office, flipping through a quarterly report. He didn't expect the call that morning. He definitely didn't expect Marcus, but within 5 minutes they were seated across from each other at a sleek conference table, the hum of business continuing just beyond the frosted door. Marcus got to the point without preamble. I'm interested in acquiring Orsini, not a location, the whole thing, every asset, every store, full rights to the brand and operations. Edward raised an eyebrow. We're not officially on the market. I'm not asking for a listing, Marcus said. I'm making an offer, one you won't want to refuse. Edward leaned back in his chair, curious now. Can I ask what's prompted this sudden interest? Marcus didn't smile. You can, but the reason doesn't change the price I'm willing to pay. Outside the office, Ellie sat in a quiet seating area, looking down at her phone, though she wasn't really reading anything. A young staffer walked past, offering her a bottle of water and a smile. She accepted it, nodding politely. The warmth. In that small gesture, unexpected after the morning she'd had, Claire's words echoed faintly in her mind. You can always tell who's not a buyer. Maybe that was true. Maybe Claire had seen exactly what she wanted to see. But what she failed to recognize was that Ellie never needed to prove her place. She had simply walked in with dignity and walked out with it intact, something Claire would never understand. Inside the office, Marcus finished outlining the terms of the acquisition. Edward Collins reviewed them silently, then looked up with mild surprise. The number was generous, more than fair. You're serious? He asked. Marcus stood, buttoning his coat. We'll have lawyers send over the paperwork. I want everything signed and in motion by the end of the week. Edward extended a hand, still a little stunned. Deal. Marcus shook it once, firmly, then walked out, not bothering to wait for further questions. He found Ellie still seated, quietly sipping water. He offered her his hand, and she took it. We're done here, he said. She looked up at him. Did you really just buy an entire company because of what happened? No, Marcus replied, walking with her toward the exit. I bought it because you were right. Some people need a reminder that not everything valuable shines on the surface. The elevator doors opened to a quiet hallway lined with white marble and framed art that looked far too expensive to be casually decorative. Marcus stepped out with his usual composed stride, followed silently by a junior executive who had met him downstairs. Ellie remained behind, waiting in the comfortable lounge just past the reception. The woman at the front desk, noticing her uncertain posture, offered her tea. Ellie hesitated, then accepted with a soft "thank you." The contrast was clear. This place, despite its polish, wasn't built to treat people poorly. It came down to individuals, not institutions. Inside a glass-walled conference room, Marcus took his seat opposite Mr. Kaplan, the regional director. Kaplan was mid-50s, sharp suit, sharp tone, the kind of man who'd been navigating boardrooms long enough to recognize when someone wasn't playing around. Still, Marcus's quiet arrival, no assistants, no legal team, threw him off. People with real money usually arrived louder. Kaplan leaned back slightly. Mr. Grant, I understand you've expressed interest in acquiring a share of our operations? No, Marcus said. Not a share. I want the whole thing, full acquisition. Assets, real estate, branding, staff contracts, all of it. Kaplan raised an eyebrow, lips tugging into a polite smirk. I see. And may I ask what prompted this generous proposal? Marcus leaned forward, laying a folder on the table. What? Impromptu, it doesn't change the numbers. I've had my team evaluate Orsini's value. Your brand is slipping. Overhead is bleeding into profits. You've been restructuring for 2 fiscal years, and you've cut 3 store managers in the last 6 months. You're looking for an out. I'm offering one. Kaplan's smirk faded. He opened the folder. Inside were breakdowns, charts, and figures far too precise to have been pulled together in just a few hours. Either Marcus's team worked fast, or he'd anticipated a deal like this long before today. Assuming your numbers are correct, Kaplan said slowly, you're still asking us to hand over a legacy chain with a century of reputation. That's not something we do over one meeting. Marcus's eyes didn't waver. I'm not here for a negotiation. You can call it legacy if you want, but I call it underperforming. I'm offering liquidity, brand preservation, and no need. For layoffs, you can keep the name or I can change it. Doesn't matter to me. Kaplan flipped through the documents again, but his hesitation now felt more performative than strategic. The offer was strong, more than strong. The truth was, Orsini's parent company had been discreetly fielding buyers for months, but no one had come to the table with this level of clarity or cash. I'll need approval from the board, Kaplan said, trying to stall. Marcus was already standing. You've already got it. Your chairman is Edward Collins. We spoke earlier. He agreed in principle. Kaplan blinked. You went above me? No. I went where decisions are made. Outside, Ellie sat quietly, hands curled around a cup of chamomile. The warmth felt good in her palms. The employee who brought it to her, a young woman named Rita, sat nearby, chatting casually about how cold the morning had been. Ellie listened more than she spoke, but her faint smile never left. No one here asked who she was. No one gave her the side-eye for her hoodie. They just offered her kindness, and that mattered more than any diamond. Inside the office, Kaplan finally exhaled. All right. If Collins signed off, there's no sense pretending this is my call anymore. Marcus handed over a single document. Preliminary acquisition contract. You'll see it matches your most recent valuation with a 7% premium. You get what you need, fast, no media, no rebranding announcement unless I choose one. Kaplan scanned the summary page. It's a fair offer. Marcus gave him a neutral. Look, it's a generous one. The pen scratched against the paper. Kaplan signed where indicated. You'll want full operational control starting when? Marcus didn't miss a beat. Immediately. He picked up the contract, tucked it into his jacket and extended a hand. I look forward to working with your team. Kaplan shook it, still processing how quickly everything had shifted. Less than 30 minutes. Marcus Grant didn't move with arrogance. He moved with purpose, and that was far more dangerous. Marcus stepped out into the lobby and found Ellie, where he'd left her, the empty teacup now resting on a side table. She looked up as he approached. It's done, he said simply. Ellie stood. What's done? He motioned toward the exit with a small smile. Come, let's go shopping. She followed him outside, pausing as the crisp wind hit her face. You really bought it? The whole company? Yes, he replied. They do. We're ready. I just moved faster. Ellie shook her head slowly, still processing. You didn't have to. That's not the point, Marcus said, opening the car door for her. They made a mistake. I just made sure they remembered it. As the door closed behind them, the car pulled away, carrying with it the new owner of Orsini Jewelers, and the woman who walked in quietly and left unknowingly at the center of a story that would soon ripple far beyond the polished glass of a single storefront. The door chimed, just as it had earlier that day, but this time, Ellie wasn't alone. She walked in beside Marcus, her steps even, her face calm. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The entire energy of the store shifted the moment they crossed the threshold. Claire looked up from behind the counter and froze. Her posture straightened. Her fingers twitched toward a ring tray, then fell back to her side as recognition spread across her face like slow-moving panic. Claire stepped out from behind the counter quickly, plastering on a smile that was visibly strained. Good afternoon, sir. Can I help? Marcus's voice was calm, almost casual. This is Ellie, my wife. She came here earlier. Claire's face drained of what little color remained. I didn't know. You didn't need to, Marcus said smoothly. That's the point. For a second, no one moved. A customer across the room glanced up, sensing the tension. Claire's mouth opened, as if to explain something, but nothing came out. Ellie didn't look at her. She had already turned her attention to the display case, the same one she had stood in front of just hours ago. The same necklace still sat there, its chain catching the light beneath the glass. She stood there quietly, hands clasped lightly in front of her. Claire hovered a few feet away, unsure whether to step forward or disappear entirely. Her silence was loud, her presence uncomfortable. Ellie finally spoke, her voice low but steady. "You still don't see people. You see wallets." Claire blinked, as if slapped, but Ellie wasn't looking for a reaction. She turned slightly and waved over a younger associate, Amanda, the same woman who had stood quietly during the earlier exchange. "Hi," Ellie said kindly. "Could you help me?" Amanda looked surprised but nodded immediately. "Of course." Ellie smiled and leaned a little closer to the glass. "I saw this necklace earlier. I'd love to take a proper look now." Amanda pulled it out carefully, draping it gently across a velvet tray. "It's a really elegant choice," she said, "and honestly, it suits you already." Ellie gave a small laugh. "You're good at this." Amanda's cheeks flushed, pleased. Claire stepped backward, not dismissed but clearly excluded. Her position in the room was still the same, but her relevance had vanished. She watched Ellie and Amanda discuss the design, chain length, and matching sets like two people who actually enjoyed the exchange. From a short distance, Marcus stood still, hands clasped loosely behind his back. He didn't interrupt. This wasn't about a purchase anymore. This was Ellie reclaiming her own narrative in her own way. Quiet power, without theatrics. Ellie tried on the necklace with Amanda's help. She examined herself in the mirror, not opposing, just observing. Amanda chatted easily, never once mentioning price or asking for confirmation of her ability to buy. It was the kind of service anyone should receive. It was what Ellie should have gotten the first time. The store remained quiet, but Claire's discomfort filled the space like humidity, unspoken, pressing, undeniable. She stood awkwardly near the register, unsure whether to leave or apologize or simply vanish. Amanda tilted her head. "We have a matching bracelet in the back. Would you like me to bring it out?" Ellie nodded. "Yes, please. I'd love to see it." As Amanda disappeared into the back room, Marcus's phone buzzed. He answered it without stepping away. Kaplan's voice came through. "Mr. Grant, I wanted to give you a heads up. Someone from a media outlet reached out. Apparently, someone leaked a video of what happened earlier today. It's gaining traction online." Marcus didn't react. "Let it." There was a pause on the line. "You're okay with this becoming public?" "Some stories should," Marcus said evenly, "especially if they make people reconsider how they treat strangers." He hung up before Kaplan could reply. When he looked back toward Ellie, she had slipped the necklace off and was examining the bracelet Amanda had brought. Her movements were thoughtful, not rushed. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply enjoying the experience that had been stolen from her that morning. Claire finally took a step forward. "Mrs. Grant, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't know who you were." Ellie didn't look at her. She spoke softly, still focused on the bracelet in her hand. "That's not the part that needs apologizing." Claire hesitated, then nodded awkwardly and stepped away again. Ellie turned slightly toward Marcus. "You're being quiet." "You're doing fine without me," he replied. Amanda reappeared with a jewelry box, carefully placing both the necklace and bracelet. Inside, Ellie accepted the box gently. "Thank you," she said. Amanda smiled. "You're very welcome." They walked toward the register and Amanda began the checkout process. Claire stood aside. She wasn't asked to help. She wasn't dismissed out loud either. But her absence from the moment was complete. As the transaction finished, Ellie turned back one more time, her voice low as she slipped the box into her bag. "You can't always see who someone is, but you can always choose how you treat them." Claire said nothing. They stepped outside into the afternoon sun. The street noise was louder now, more people, more movement. But around Ellie and Marcus, it all felt still. She adjusted her coat and looked over at him. "Do you regret buying the place just for this?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, then at the bag in her hand and the calm expression on her face. "Ask me. Again in a few days," he said. Ellie smiled. Not because it was a victory, not because someone had been put in their place, but because something broken had been restored without shouting, without vengeance, just clarity, just grace. It started with a phone camera. A bystander had recorded the entire moment, Ellie being escorted out of the store without raising her voice, and later walking back in beside Marcus. The second clip showed her calmly browsing as the staff shifted uncomfortably, unaware that the woman they had dismissed was now married to the new owner of the company. The video was uploaded anonymously, captioned simply, "From insulted to owner in 2 hours." Within hours, it went viral. By morning, the clip had millions of views across multiple platforms. News outlets picked it up, framing it as a modern-day parable about prejudice, class assumptions, and quiet power. The story was everywhere. Talk shows, podcasts, reaction videos. It wasn't just about jewelry anymore. It was about who gets to be treated with respect and who doesn't. Comment sections filled with personal stories from people who had faced similar humiliation in retail stores. For every post calling it satisfying revenge, 10 others talked about the deeper issue, how often people were judged by their clothes, their accents, their silence. Orsini's corporate office moved fast. Claire was suspended pending a formal review. Statements were drafted. PR teams scrambled to get ahead of the narrative, but they didn't expect what came next. Marcus stepped forward, not with a press team behind him, but with a handwritten note shared through a single social media post. "This isn't about canceling anyone. We're not in the business of public takedowns. We're correcting a culture that rewards assumption and punishes humility. My wife didn't want this attention, but maybe that's exactly why it's necessary." The comment section exploded. Again, but this time with applause. No dramatic speeches, no finger-pointing, just a message people could stand behind. Ellie hadn't even seen the post when the first call came in. A producer from a national morning show wanted her to appear and talk about the experience. She declined. Another show reached out, then a major digital magazine. She said no again. It wasn't her style. She never liked being in the spotlight, but the messages kept coming, from strangers this time, from women who had been turned away in boutiques, men who'd been followed in electronics stores, teenagers who'd been asked to leave malls for looking out of place. They wrote with heartbreak, with frustration, but also with hope. One message stood out. It was from a single mother in Michigan who wrote, "Watching you walk back in, it healed something in me. Not because you won, but because you didn't yell, you didn't stoop, you just existed with dignity, and that was enough." Ellie sat with that message for a long time. When she finally agreed to appear on one of the shows, she wore the same hoodie she'd worn into the store. No makeup team, no styled hair, just her. The host tried to steer the conversation toward the dramatic arc, the revenge narrative, but Ellie gently redirected it. "I didn't go back to prove anything. I went back because being invisible isn't the same as being irrelevant. Sometimes all people need is a reminder that quiet doesn't mean powerless." Clips of the interview were shared everywhere, not because they were fiery, but because they weren't. Her calm presence, her deliberate choice to avoid drama, made the message land harder. It felt real. It felt like the kind of change people could believe in. Back at the corporate level, Marcus and Ellie made a joint decision. They wouldn't just own the stores, they'd rebuild them. The Orsini name would remain, but the culture would change. New hiring policies were implemented, diversity training rolled out across every location, and a new company-wide motto appeared above every register. "Every customer matters." Ellie didn't want to be involved in the day-to-day operations, but she did sit in on the first few manager meetings. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, it was brief. Don't hire people who can memorize a diamond cut. Hire people who can look someone in the eye and make them feel welcome. The shift was gradual but noticeable. New store layouts were designed to feel more open, less intimidating. Dress codes were relaxed. Staff were encouraged to connect with customers instead of filtering them. And while a few old-school employees resisted, most adapted quickly. The chain started getting new kinds of reviews, not about product quality, but about warmth. Months passed. The media storm quieted. Other scandals and stories took the spotlight, and the world moved on. But for Orsini, something lasting had shifted. One sunny afternoon, Ellie passed by the original store. It had been remodeled, brighter, more open. The counters were lowered slightly, the lighting warmer. She didn't plan to go in, but something made her pause. Inside, a young woman stood behind the counter. She looked up and smiled as Ellie stepped through the door. "Hi, welcome in. Can I help you find anything today?" Ellie glanced around. The necklace was no longer in the front display. In its place was a small sign with a quote etched into a glass plaque. "Kindness doesn't require recognition, just intention." She didn't introduce herself. She didn't expect to be recognized. The woman didn't know who she was, and that was the point. She wasn't greeted with fanfare or careful wording. She was greeted with decency. She smiled and replied, "Just browsing, thank you." The staffer nodded and returned to restocking a display tray. Ellie wandered for a few minutes, admiring the layout, the small shifts in how things were organized. Every detail said something, that the place had grown, that maybe the world, in its own slow way, could grow too. She stepped back out into the afternoon air and zipped her jacket. For the first time in months, she felt something she hadn't expected from this whole ordeal. Peace, not because justice had been served, not because the internet had cheered, but because the next woman who walked through those doors in a hoodie wouldn't need to be anyone special to be treated like she mattered. The room was quiet, but not tense. Rows of store managers from every Orsini branch sat facing a small stage. In the newly renovated downtown headquarters, Ellie stood at the front. No podium, no slides, just her in a navy blazer over the same worn jeans she'd been wearing the day she walked into the store that started everything. The managers waited, some curious, others unsure what exactly she planned to say. She looked at each of them before speaking, her voice clear but calm. "I'm not here as your boss," she began. "That's not my job. I'm here as someone who walked into one of our stores and was told, without a word, that I didn't belong." Her gaze didn't waver. "I'm here to remind you what that feels like, and why we're doing this differently now." No one interrupted. Some shifted in their seats. A few nodded slowly. "Don't judge the shoes," Ellie said. "Learn to see the person. You might not know their story, but they walked in for a reason. That's all that should matter." The room stayed silent for a beat longer, then the sound of soft applause began near the back and slowly filled the space. Ellie didn't smile for effect. She just thanked them, stepped down from the platform and walked out without fanfare. Marcus waited for her in the hallway. He held a folder in his hand, the nameplate on the front labeled CEO Transition. She glanced down at it, then back. "At him. You sure about her?" he asked. "She knows what she's doing," Ellie replied, "and she's not interested in playing favorites." Marcus nodded. "Then she's the right one." The woman they had chosen, Camilla Rhodes, was young but experienced. She came from a competing brand that had built its success on community-first retail strategy. Camilla's track record showed numbers, but more importantly, she'd led with ethics. She didn't tolerate gatekeeping. She didn't prioritize high spenders over respect. When Ellie interviewed her, Camilla asked only one question before accepting the job. Are you willing to give me full control, even when it means pushing back on legacy habits? Ellie had said yes, without hesitation. Marcus signed the transfer. Paperwork effective immediately. Camilla would now oversee every decision, from training to marketing to floor design. It was Marcus's company on paper, but in every other way, it now belonged to the people it served. Ellie didn't take a title, but her role shifted. Invitations started arriving from conferences, panels, podcasts. She never called herself an activist, but her voice carried weight because she never raised it. At diversity and retail events, she stood on stage and told her story without dramatics. She spoke simply about being unseen, about how easy it was to overlook someone who doesn't look like a buyer. Her words weren't carefully packaged for applause, but they landed with quiet impact. Respect isn't expensive, she said once during a panel in Boston. It's just inconvenient for people who've gotten used to skipping it. Her words began appearing in print, magazines, blog posts, social media captions. But she never built a platform out of the moment. She turned it into a conversation, then stepped back and let others speak too. Young retail workers began writing in, store managers reshared her clips in training meetings, and slowly, the ripple kept moving. Months later, the original Orsini store, the one where everything began, finished its full transformation. Gone were the tall glass counters that separated staff from customers. The lighting was warmer, the music softer, the uniforms replaced with casual, approachable outfits. There were no appointments needed. No one asked what someone could afford. On reopening day, Ellie arrived not with media, but with a group of 6 young women from a local shelter. They had been invited privately, quietly, for a mentorship walkthrough. Each one was under 25. Each one had a story. Ellie greeted them with hugs and reassurance as they stepped into the store. Amanda, the young associate who had helped Ellie that day, months ago, now managed the store. She guided the women through the display areas, explaining not just the jewelry, but the purpose of each redesign. The lower counters, the inclusive posters, the open floor plan. The girls listened, tried on pieces, laughed softly at each other's picks. One of them, a shy girl with thick glasses and sleeves covering her wrists, picked up a silver ring and whispered, "I've never worn anything like this before." "You're allowed to," Ellie told her. "You don't have to earn this kind of space. You just have to walk in." The moment was light but grounding. It felt like everything had come full circle, not just for Ellie, but for every customer who had ever been weighed by appearance instead of worth. As the girls moved toward the front counter to browse more, the door behind them opened. A woman in a cream blouse and slacks stepped inside, her heels clicking lightly against the new wood floor. Claire paused just past the entrance, her eyes taking in the space. She hadn't been back since her suspension. She looked older, not in age, but in presence. Her gaze moved across the store, stopping when it landed on Ellie. Their eyes met. Neither of them spoke. Ellie didn't stiffen or turn away. She didn't gloat. She didn't offer forgiveness or hostility. She simply gave a soft, polite nod and returned her attention to the young women in front of her. Claire lingered for a second longer, then drifted off toward a display case near the back. No one stopped her. No one whispered. She was just another customer now. Ellie stood quietly near the center of the store, surrounded by people who didn't know what she had been through and who didn't need to. The store wasn't her victory lap. It was a new beginning, one that didn't need her name on a plaque or her face on a campaign. The woman who had once been turned away for not looking the part was now a silent architect of a space where that would never happen again. And that was enough. The late afternoon sun settled softly over the sidewalk cafe where Ellie and Marcus sat, sipping coffee in companionable silence. Across the street, people passed by in waves, mothers with strollers, teenagers in pairs. Older couples, arm in arm, all moving through the day, unaware of the quiet conversation happening at the corner table. Ellie wore the necklace she'd once been denied, the simple diamond pendant catching occasional light as she shifted slightly. In her seat, it didn't gleam with triumph, it simply belonged to her now, like her space in the world. Not earned, not granted. Just hers. Marcus leaned back in his chair, eyes on the store across the way, a new Orsini flagship, rebranded and reopened 6 months earlier. The changes were subtle if you didn't know what to look for, but to Marcus, they were everywhere. The warmth of the storefront design, the natural smiles from staff, the quiet way people lingered instead of rushing out. There was no velvet rope, no cold glass cases that put distance between buyer and product. It was a place built for everyone. He glanced sideways at Ellie, her fingers wrapped around the mug, her gaze drifting somewhere peaceful. "Still glad I bought it?" he asked. Ellie turned to him, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "No," she said gently. "I'm glad you listened." He didn't reply right away. He just nodded, accepting the truth in her answer. She hadn't wanted revenge, hadn't needed to prove a point. All she'd wanted was to be seen, and when she hadn't been, Marcus hadn't fixed it with noise or confrontation. He'd simply believed her, and then acted. Across the street, inside the store, a teenager stood nervously near the counter. She wore an oversized hoodie and gripped a folded $10 bill in her hand. Her eyes darted from one display to another, unsure of where to begin. Ellie stood up, leaving her cup behind, and walked across without announcing herself. She stepped through the doors with the same quiet grace she always carried, now without hesitation. Inside, she walked over to the girl with an easy smile. "Looking for something special?" Ellie asked, her tone kind. The girl nodded quickly, then lowered her voice. "It's for my mum, for her birthday. I don't know what to get." Ellie nodded like she'd been there herself. "That's okay. Want some help?" The girl hesitated, then smiled back, grateful. Together, they moved from one small shelf to another, discussing simple bracelets and birthstone charms. No one pulled out cameras. No reporters hovered in the wings. Just two people figuring out how to say something meaningful with a gift. Marcus watched through the glass. From his seat, arms crossed loosely, eyes soft. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. He knew Ellie would never call herself a role model, never step forward to claim credit. But she had become something rare, an anchor in a world that too often drifted toward noise. As Ellie helped the girl choose a delicate silver chain with a charm shaped like a crescent moon, the cashier rang it up quietly and handed it over in a small white bag. The girl clutched it with both hands like it was the most important thing she'd ever owned. She thanked Ellie, her voice barely above a whisper, then left with a bounce in her step. Ellie remained a moment longer, glancing around the store, not as someone checking for perfection, but as someone appreciating what it had become. A small boy with messy hair reached up to tap on the glass of a watch display. No one told him not to. A middle-aged man in a construction jacket tried on a ring and nodded approvingly. A young couple picked out promise rings, taking their time. She stepped back outside and walked across the street. Marcus stood as she approached. "Successful mission?" he asked. "She'll remember it," Ellie said, shrugging. "That's enough." He kissed her temple and picked up the coffees, and together they walked around the block toward a quieter stretch of the city. Ellie glanced down at her necklace, not out of vanity, but in memory. How strange that something so small had started something so big. Not the pendant, but the moment she'd been told she didn't belong. Later that evening, just before closing time, Ellie walked through the doors of a smaller Orsini store, a location she'd quietly supported opening in a low-income neighborhood that hadn't had access to retail like this before. There were no velvet ropes, no minimum spends, just a place where everyone walked in on equal footing. She checked the counters, spoke with the staff, thanked the young manager on duty. As the last customer stepped out into the night, Ellie walked to the entrance, flipped the sign in the door's window, and locked up behind her. The small sign on the door didn't read, "Closed." It read, "Welcome, always." She stood there for a moment, fingers resting on the cool glass, watching the streetlights flicker on, one by one. No headlines, no applause, just a clean, quiet ending. Her voice echoed softly in her mind, the words she'd once shared during a rare interview, words now used in staff training videos and social media clips. They saw someone who didn't belong. He showed them she was never alone. That's how the story ended. Not with fireworks, not with a speech, just with a door closing gently and a promise on the other side of the glass. If this story moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs it, and don't forget to subscribe. More real stories are coming your way.